Awesome. Hi, everyone. I know this is the last talk before lunch, so I will try my best to not bleed into lunch, and we can take questions or talk about stuff after as well, too, just because I am also very hungry, so I'd like to get lunch. I'm going to be talking about exploring entities within a threat detection system. First, there's a bunch there. It's going to be like kind of theory around how you might think about a system from the ground up if you've never had to assemble one before, if you were thinking about kind of building your own. And why am I even allowed to talk about this? Probably not, but I am currently a threat research engineer and former data scientist, and I put that in quotes, at Material Security. Previously worked at Duo doing threat research and data science. Before that, worked at Human Security doing threat research and data science. Before that, worked at Gartner building search engine ranking models. That's for information retrieval and ordering those results. I am also like a former actual scientist, not just a data scientist. So happy to talk about that stuff as well too, if anyone's interested. The PhD was in experimental nuclear astrophysics, which is almost as far away from cybersecurity as you can get, but there's a whole bunch of weird little similarities, which is why I'm in this field now, which is fun. So first, what is an entity? An entity is a jawn. And my talk is over. No, but that's basically it. It's a whole bunch of different things based on what you are observing or encountering in your system. So it is something. And I'm going to emphasize the something because what that does is that it excludes actions or events. These are physical or digital or temporal things that are present. Users, files, etc. Each entity is unique and has a unique identifier. That identifier might not be the same across from your system to a different system. So we all know that IP addresses, that's their identifier and their name, and that's unique within the boundary of internet routing protocols. But if you think about just me as a person, I could have multiple different IDs across different systems, and they might not even overlap. An entity can perform actions. So this would be logging into a system, doing something, and an entity can have actions performed against it. So this would be changing permissions, doing something. And that's it. It's a pretty quick definition, but it sets the stage for what we'll be talking about. And again, this is just to try to exclude stuff like individual actions or things that aren't directly related to something that we're either trying to protect or something that is doing something. So I went through a couple different examples, and I'm sorry that the bottom's a little cut off. User, file, email address, a threat, a network, a website, anything like that. That's what we're going to consider are our possible entities. For the most part, I usually focus on users, devices, and networks, and individual components of each of those, but your needs may vary, especially if you're dealing with detection and response on a particular file system. You're going to be more focused on files and processes and directories and stuff like that, the actual like guts of it, versus something that is a little more abstract or diffuse. Oh yeah, sorry. Why should you care? This is a good question. Because not everyone does care about these. And I don't say care in terms of the connotation of like caring, like, oh, I don't care about it, I hate it. Just in terms of for some people and for some processes and for some companies, this actually doesn't matter. You might not be in an environment where having to understand the interactions between files and users and everything else is even important for you. And that's okay. This talk isn't for everyone. And I know that like I kind of exist in this space where it's important for me and important for the types of security threats that I have to deal with. But hopefully, at least, this will give you some ideas of maybe bringing this this concept or this understanding into what you're doing. So, if we understand the entities within our system, we understand the system itself, and the context in which those entities are acting or existing. Philosophical, and I know this is, there have been some philosophical talks earlier today already, but this is kind of like the brunt of it. If I know what are the things that I am protecting or observing or seeing within my system or my environment, that's how I understand what's going on. This goes back to general science, any sort of observability tracks, but if you don't know what is in there, you don't know your system. That's a very simple way to think about like the import of this. But the context is also really important. We think about like the defender's advantage. I know the context of my environment and my behavior of my of the systems under my purview, and that's what matters as well too. Not just the entities themselves, but effectively why they're doing stuff and how they're operating. So real quick examples first of like how to take these sort of more abstract concepts and bring them into something a little more grounded. First, search engines. So yeah, sorry, I'm just gonna try to fix the display. Okay, I might just be running up and down and scrolling. So first, search engines. I think everyone here has used a search engine before. I don't know how many of you have built a search engine before, or any sort of information retrieval system. But at its core, a user or something interacting with that system is trying to achieve some goal, learn some knowledge, gain some understanding. Each document, and document again is a very broad term, within that is indexed by that search engine, might provide the answer to the question they're asking. So the search engine's goal is to help the user find the right document quickly so they can go about their life or whatever else that they're doing. Online workspace. Each employee now, which is just a different special case of a user, has some job they want to complete. They need to communicate with other employees, and they usually do that through documents. Those documents might be code or code reviews, chat messages, like typical files, all that sort of stuff. But that's where the knowledge of the interaction is recorded such that the company, the entire system that's at play, can achieve some goal, be successful, not go bankrupt, etc. And finally, threat detection systems. So a threat detection system is trying to protect some sort of environment, and by monitoring actions taken within that ecosystem and entering that ecosystem from the outside. The actors within that system or against that system might be malicious. The system should be able to stop the adversaries or those bad actors from performing actions in that environment against the protected entities or documents, and the system should not interfere with the actions from legitimate users or for legitimate purposes. I know definitions are not fun, but I hope from those three examples you saw the basics of what our systems are talking about. We have something, we have entities within it that can achieve a goal or want to achieve a goal, entities that can provide the means to achieve that goal, and some constraints on how the system should operate when there is action or activities between these different entities. So, again, if we understand our entities, we know about our environment, we know the context, but we also know how we need our system to respond appropriately to their actions. If I'm a search engine and a user types in a search and I give them terrible documents, I'm not fulfilling my job as a search engine for that. So we're really trying to make sure that we achieve our goals based on the entities present and the actions that they are taking. So we get to the main point of this. How do you describe an entity? How do you actually take this sort of abstract color on top of everything and use it to inform your system? And we can describe an entity in a bunch of different ways, which we'll go through, and I'll provide rationale behind what you might want to use that for. First, properties. What is a property? I like to think of it as just a driver's license. Anything that's written there is probably going to be a property of your entity. If you've done any Kimball modeling, this is the dimensions for your entity. But stuff like the name, the driver's license ID, which again is unique within the confines of the system, address, even like dates. When was this entity created? When was it last updated? What are some other attributes about it? Not every single one of these is going to be important, but it's always nice to kind of create a data dictionary of like what you could even use. I don't think most of us are dealing with driver's licenses, but if you are, you know all of this. In our case, we might be thinking more on the aspects of like a general user within our system. So they have an ID. If a user doesn't have an ID, that should be your first step. Create a unique identifier for all your users. The registration date or the first time that user enters your system, time of last activity, permissions, location, etc. These are all fixed or slowly changing attributes of the user entity that we can use to know kind of like what's going on. Similarly for a device, you're probably going to bring in more kind of digital or technical attributes like the operating system, installed applications, maybe even just like what the actual hardware is for that device. And then for network, you have stuff like the actual ID again, IP address, something like that. Location information if you want to bring that in, time of last activity, as well as, you know, different types of installed applications like anonymizers, VPNs, etc. on there. So each of these, they look really similar. You could basically go through any single entity you have and set up like a fixed list of what you might want to know about it. Not every single entity is going to have each parameter, but you're probably going to have a lot of overlap and start seeing some commonalities and similarities in what you are trying to describe and understand. Within the context of a threat detection system, how might we actually want to use this? So this is where human or operator choice comes into play when we're actually defining our system and how it should respond to those actions. So if I see that a user is inactive or hasn't done anything recently, I need my system to respond to that. And I can also make a choice that my system should not respond to that, but that's still a choice in how I codify my system. A threat detection system is a combination of finding those weirdness things and doing some sort of response to it. So we could say if the user is inactive, can't even access whatever I'm trying to protect. Like you can't read documents, can't do whatever. We might also look at the restricted permissions of a user. If they aren't allowed to view code within my company or on a service, they shouldn't be viewing code. For devices, this is where, you know, sort of more typical policy controls come into play. Don't have outdated operating systems, don't have non-approved software installed, make sure it's updated, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the network side, that's where we get into like OFAC restricted, so you shouldn't have network transmissions from, you know, North Korea or Russia or something like that. But you might also say that for the context of what I'm protecting, I only need traffic from hosting providers, or I should never see traffic from hosting providers. And we can make some really quick decisions about how our system is going to respond based on these you know, very, very approximate pieces of information that are more or less fixed. Behavior. Behavior is exactly what you think, existence. I jumped ahead. Existence is exactly what you think. Has my system observed this entity before? And I'm going to include the word recently, but I'll talk about that briefly. If you've ever talked to someone who does like online e-commerce or anything like that, you might have heard a term called like the cold start problem. How do you know what your system should do if it's never seen this user before? How do you recommend the products on the homepage of Amazon if a completely new user is going in? And I know it's weird to think of new users for Amazon, that's been around for a while, but think about the abstract definition of a user might be a combination of the IP address, device type, something else. Also people, more people exist over time. But so what we're trying to figure out is looking at, have we seen this entity before, and how and if our system should respond to it. So some examples of how we might want to respond to it is if we have a completely new user, we're going to prompt them to go through their onboarding, which might include MFA registration, getting into like our protected system, or adding them into an auxiliary control system that we have. We might also just say, nope, can't do anything. Just gonna like cut off all your permissions. You can't actually do anything in this system until some external control is changed. That's like an admin saying, bypass code, here you go, you're all set up. And until that, even if they are a potential future legitimate user of the system, they won't be in. For devices, similar ideas. If we've never seen a device ID before, we might just say, nope, can't even access it, cut everything off. Same with networks. We can also do what in some circles is called step-up authentication, where if we've already seen some other aspects of that interaction, we can require stronger controls or stronger attestation of who or what that entity is, so that they can actually go about their processes. Again, very abstract, but the thing to note here is that even though existence is maybe the first thing you would bring into your threat detection system to watch for, it's exceedingly important because you are making a choice now. It's also something that I've seen firsthand that security companies that do threat detection and response forget to include or consider. A very basic example from a renowned MFA provider is that they didn't have controls for if I've never seen an ASN or an autonomous system number in this protected environment before, yeah, do whatever. Even if it's completely bypassed, you can go through. So I don't want to sound like I'm harping on this, but I am harping on it because even security practitioners can get this wrong sometimes. So just think about what you're tracking and how you want to go about it. One important thing, and this is where we get back to the recently side of it, is that you might want to consider the time horizon of your observations. What I mean by that is that if I see some action or some entity on some calendar date, does that still matter today? If I log into a system 4 years ago and nothing else then, when I come back to that system, should that system still remember me? There are cases where the answer is no. I might want to forget that I've seen something on the time span of a week, depending on what I'm watching. Or, especially in the case of threats, I want to remember that forever and I should never expire that information. But again, we're still defining how our system is going to identify that existence, decide whether or not this does quote unquote exist, and use that to inform its actions or responses. You can also think of existence across like a continuum. It existed 3 years ago, not 1 year ago, something like that, and have different ways to step up for that. So you might see multiple different time horizons. Usually in my experience, the like approximate calendar units of a week, a month, a year, those are pretty common, as well as multiples of those too. So you don't have to overthink that one too much, but it does depend on what entity you are tracking the existence of and how volatile it is within your system. Something that changes frequently doesn't even matter if you want to remember it for a long time, because you're probably not going to see it that much. Behaviors. This is where we get into what actions the entity is performing within your system or external to the system. Oops. So within our system, we might be tracking stuff like how many successful actions or authentications or downloads, whatever that is, this entity has performed. How long have they been in our system when they've connected? What have they done? And when do they actually leave? Or just the aggregate collection of actions that are taken. I see user login, they've downloaded 5 documents, they've read 3, and they shared 2 of them, just kind of as a group. Don't even care about like the timestamp of those events or what else. All of that is within our protected system that our threat detection system is monitoring, but we also have behavior external to the system. This is trickier, and it's where threat intelligence feeds kind of come into play. If I've never observed a particular IP address or a country network traffic, then technically my system doesn't know that those might be bad unless I have some sort of preconceived notion that I've codified into my system saying like anything new is bad, or I ingest a feed that says here are some bad things to watch out for. But those feeds are probably based on the behavior that someone else has observed, like a Mystic or Talos. So they are still using that behavioral information to provide intelligence to someone else. You might also just directly look at they might provide the behaviors present for a given entity or threat actor, like they're using this type of malware or dropper, or they're using these MITRE attack techniques kind of in sequence or in concert to go for that. And depending on how you've defined your threat detection system, you might either be able to directly identify those TTPs, or you might just say, here's the indicator, here's my fixed ID, my fixed unique ID for that entity that I can now respond to in kind. So when we think of behavior, this is a lot of it, and again, this is colored by my own experience. Logins, downloads, administrative actions, registering for MFA, anytime some action is prevented, that's a really interesting one to take, and the prevention could either come from my threat detection system itself or the system that's being interacted with. If I go to try to edit a Google Doc and it says, hey, you can't edit, that could be considered a failed action because of the permissions of my particular user entity that I'm using to try to edit that document. And same for like network. Logins, really nice, and a really good thing to watch and monitor for if you don't already or haven't already. And I use, you can think of logins as any sort of entrance into the system itself to make sure that it's like something coming from the outside into your protected environment. Relationships. This is when we have multiple different entities at play. How do they actually interact or talk to each other? If this looks like a graph, good, bonus points. But we're not just going to be looking at just a user or just a device in isolation, but we want to look at the pairs or triplets or tuples of these different entities and how they've acted and responded. Within these relationships, we can think of the existence of it. Has this user ever used that device? Has this user connected through this network? Has this device connected through this network? Some of those things. And again, the time horizon consideration for existence still comes into play here as well too. We also have just the behaviors of these connections as well, or these relationships. So when this user was on this device, what did they actually do? How many successful or failed logins did they have connecting to that device or that network? Here, this image is pairs of entities, but again, you can have any sort of collection of entities that you want. The issue just becomes with the higher number of types, so user, device, network, each of those types, then the more fragmented your information becomes. the amount of events and recordings you can have on each of those faceted entities then becomes smaller, which means in a statistical sense, you might not trust exactly what's going on as much as you would otherwise. But this can be really helpful for if you think of personalization, this can come into play there, or personalization in terms of understanding the behavior of your legitimate users within the environment. If I'm always connecting to my corporate intranet through a controlled managed device from my home network, then that is my overall behavior across all of those. If I connect with my corporate managed device from a different network, maybe that doesn't matter as much because I've already maintained the fact that I have some sort of user-based credentials and my device credentials to attest that I actually am the legitimate user and person who should be accessing that stuff. We finally get to the meat of it, which is emergent characteristics. At this point, a lot of you are probably thinking like, all of this makes a ton of sense. Why are we even talking about this? And the emergent characteristics might be the first thing that is probably the first thing that like you might not have already thought about before. Since I am a former / current data scientist, I'm just gonna call these embeddings. I think everyone here knows about some types of embeddings. Word embeddings are extremely popular, large language models, all that sort of stuff. But we're not just limited to using embeddings for words. We can use it for our entities and our arbitrary actions and systems that are at play. So instead of having a collection of fixed properties, we can have an embedding that represents those properties. So that embedding, a vector of numbers, just represents our user or our device or our network. And we can use that within our threat detection system. If you think about each entry within the embedding as a float indicator of how something is, like my embedding right now might include 2 fields that are how hungry I am, because it's right before lunch, as well as how nervous I've been this entire talk. That's a decent way to go about that, but we're not deciding to include each of those values. We are learning those values or computing those values based on what we've observed, what we've actually collected, what information is present in our system. So here, converting properties, which are these more or less fixed attributes, into an embedding might seem like you can't even do that. But you could say that if I have this user that was registered on a certain date, this device that I first saw on that certain date, and this connection to a network that I first saw on this certain date, those embeddings should be close to each other in some general sense. Because they all share that same property of registration date between them. And as the different properties that you've tracked and organized differ, then those embeddings, those vectors will be further apart as well. We can also turn behavior into embeddings. And this is where you'll see most of the work as well too. There are 2 facets of this that we can look at. We can see, given a collection of embeddings or a collection of entities that we want to represent by embeddings, what happened when we saw those together? Did we have successful access into our system? Were they blocked by our threat detection system somehow? And the process that's used to generate or calculate those embeddings will be informed by those actions. Taking each one kind of on its own to say, yes, I saw this, make the goodness of this particular entity embedding much higher or more positive. What is less common though is the longitudinal behavior of these entities over time. This is like the sequence of actions, sequence of activity that these entities are performing, but taken as almost like a sentence of what they're doing. If you've read, I don't know why you would have, but if you've read like Airbnb search engine ranking model papers in the past, they talk about using session-based recommender systems within their search engine. What that means is that as I am searching for a place to stay, my next search in that same session is going to be informed by my previous search based on what listings I'm interacting with. So taken for a threat detection system, if I am a user and I'm connecting from a whole bunch of different laptops across time, but always from like the same network, then I can use that sentence of device identifiers for the device to try to figure out like, how do I as a user actually switch between these devices? Am I doing something methodical to switch from Windows to Mac and back and forth because I'm testing some system out? Is there some change based on the operating system versions that I'm running through? And that can be inferred based on this collection of behavior as well too. This is tough to do right. If you want a quick and dirty way to do it, turn each of those into a quote unquote word, run them through Word2Vec, you have free embeddings. Free. Do we need all of this? This is definitely what all of you are thinking right now, and the answer is no. I really like this because it's anytime I see a question, I think back to this. You may or may not remember that there is a paper that was, did CERN discover superluminal neutrinos? Neutrinos moving faster than the speed of light. And the entire paper that was submitted was just the word no. So I like including that. A better question to ask instead of do we need this or will we ever need this or should I use this is how much of this or to what extent do I need to use these concepts? And my second favorite answer to that is it depends. And it really does depend on your system. You know your system and your environment the best. And because of that, you should make informed choices about what you're bringing in, especially because all of this is powered by data, log retention, information that we're keeping track of. In some cases, this is, might not be privacy preserving since you are tracking a user through time. So you might want to make sure that you are controlling for that or ignoring some aspects of an entity or really definite boundaries between your entities to preserve some aspect of privacy or confidentiality within the system as well. But to take this as a whole, I say start with the simplest thing first. That sounds weird, and it's also going to depend on each one of you. If you are someone who's coming from a statistics or machine learning background, the simplest thing for you might be throw everything through an LLM because you don't have to think or make any choices, and it's just going to quote unquote work. But for most of us, this is going to be making sure that my logs are in order, making sure I can retain some information and access it later. You're probably going to start with the existence side of things. Have I seen this IP before? Do I have a way to expire that IP if I deem it necessary? And this helps make sure that your entire threat detection system, this feature entity tracking system, is robust. You don't want to throw a whole bunch of complexity at this problem, especially when you're starting out, have things fall over and you have no idea like where to even start from. So by starting simple and making sure that your infrastructure to compute these values, to track them, to include them into your logging system for the future, maintain some sort of present information to that is extremely, extremely important. As you add additional aspects of these entity features into it, continuously monitor and assess what your system is doing. Is it actually achieving the goal that you set out for it? Am I stopping threats? Am I stopping attacks? Am I not interfering with legitimate user access? That's a really good one. We focus so much on stopping a threat, but the easiest way to do that is don't allow any actions to ever take place ever. You've stopped every threat. But that doesn't allow legitimate users to actually perform their actions and achieve their goals within your system. You can assess that against that actual objective. Am I stopping threats? or against the levels lower in the system as a way to like cross-check. So if I see that I have some existence properties within my threat detection system, I bring in some behavior and I start highlighting that anything that's relatively new is getting automatically picked up as something that's like a threat. I might need to tune or adjust how my system responds to each of those aspects of it. And then finally, add in complexity when and only if it is actually warranted. Each of these different feature sets for entities, you definitely don't need all of them, but you really shouldn't go to like the more complex ones unless you actually do need it. If your entire threat detection system can be summed up as if traffic not from US, then disallow, why add anything else? And you might need to go into the processes or other non-technical controls or non-digital controls to achieve your goal of securing like your environment, learning, training, education, etc. Having things stay simple over time also helps because you are on a team. Even if you are a security team of one, you're still on a team with the company that is employing you. If you are a security founder of a company of one, you are still on a team with the companies that you are working with. If you honestly are a lone wolf, one, that probably doesn't exist. So I would want you to think about like who is actually on your team and who you're trying to support. And one thing for there is that the person on your team might be you in the future. If the system falls over and you don't understand the system that you wrote 6 months ago, you're gonna have a much harder time and be kicking yourself for not documenting, not keeping track of things, not having disaster recovery plans. So you're still on a team with yourself. I know there's a lot in this and it is very abstract, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how to think about the things that you're trying to protect, how they act within a system, and how you might want to build up your understanding of that complexity and of that context so that you can achieve your own goals of being successful or something. I don't know. Any questions? When is lunchtime? Yeah, always happy to talk about this sort of stuff. I know, I think some of the empty net was my poor presentation, some of it was lunch as well. But yeah, just find me. Always happy to chat about this, and especially since this was very light on really deep or actual steps to take. Always glad to talk through those versus this very high level overview of everything. Thank you.